Okay, here's the third and final part. So we know now why businesses were failing, why people were being fired, why the stock market crashed, and why banks are failing. Okay, and now we're talking about the response from the federal government, which was practically nothing. So one thing Hoover decided to do was, okay, we understand there's a problem here. A lot of people are out of work. Let's get into what are called public works projects. And so Hoover tries this. Okay, a public works project is when the government finances a building project of some kind, a dam that can produce hydroelectricity, and also provide irrigation for places that need water, farms, things like that. Maybe there's a police station that needs to be built or a government building of some kind. And so the idea is the government uses this money to do this building project, and in the process, they're going to contract people and they're going to hire people. And there are people that are going to be working because of this project. And so it means then that those people are working, they're going to get money, they're going to buy stuff. This is going to help the economy, they're going to pay taxes. It's a win-win. Okay. So this created some jobs, but was just a small fraction of what actually needed. It was kind of like taking a garden hose and trying to put out a skyscraper fire. Okay, it's not going to work. It's just not enough. Of course, they didn't know that that was going to be the case. They were trying something. They just didn't know it was going to be not enough. Okay. One of the building projects that they did was the Hoover Dam, right there on the border with Arizona and Nevada. That was a big one. Put a lot of people to work, but like I said, it wasn't enough, especially at the peak. Like I talked about yesterday, how at the peak it was 25% unemployment. That's crazy. Okay. Now, if you're going to have a public works project, you got to have money. The government's got to have money. And so they can't tax the people because nobody's paying taxes because nobody's making any money and businesses are failing. And so businesses aren't going to pay taxes. So where are you going to get the money to do your public works project? Well, they borrowed the money. Okay, they went to people that were really rich and to banks that were still, open and didn't have a problem. They had loaned money responsibly and all that stuff. So when you borrow money, you're running a deficit. So if you have $1 million that you're using to run the government off of, which is just like a drop in the bucket, obviously, but for the purposes here, so let's say you've got $1 million and you have $1 million and you're going to run the government off the $1 million. Okay. If you're going to have to spend more than that $1 million, you're going to have to borrow. And however much you borrow, that's the deficit. That's the amount that you need to make up the difference. Okay. So you've got $1 million, you've spent $1 million, you need $1 million more, and that $1 million is your deficit. Okay. Now this worried Hoover, and it worried a lot of people because they thought that this would be less money that businesses would be able to borrow from the banks that now the government's borrowing from to get things going. Okay. He feared that also the federal government's debt would grow too large and would never be payable again. And that was the fear that he had. And so ultimately, Republicans were in charge. We'd had, Hoover now is the third Republican president that's been in charge, and Republicans are running Congress. And so they all got blamed for this. Whether they deserved it or not, they got the blame. So in the 1930s congressional elections, like the midterm election, this resulted in the majority going into the Democrats, or the majority in the House of Representatives going to Democrats, okay? And then Republicans only retained their majority in the Senate by one seat, okay? So Republicans got hit hard politically because of this crisis. So Hoover says, let's rescue the banks. And so he wanted to expand the money supply. He wanted to help banks to get back to doing work, loaning, money, and then loaning money to the businesses. Businesses then hire people. It's kind of that trickle down supply side economics that we talked about. And so businesses expand, they hire, and so on. So he says, let's get the banks back on their feet. Let's give them a ton of money so that they can go back to work. And so they wanted more money printed, and the Federal Reserve refused. And so they set up what's called the National Credit Corporation. What it was is it created a big pool of money that troubled banks could go to and draw from that pool of money with the National Credit Corporation, and then they could turn around and use that money to run their bank. Unfortunately, there wasn't near enough money in that National Credit Corporation pool. It was a drop in the bucket of what needed to happen, and so there really just wasn't enough there for the banks to even build off of or use to be able to effectively help businesses and make loans and help businesses get back on their feet. Okay. And then you have the 1932 Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which then decided to skip the banks and then give loans directly to businesses. But this failed because it was ultimately too cautious. They were a little too tight with the money and didn't lend it out to those businesses that really needed it. And so once again, it just wasn't enough. It was like using that garden hose on the skyscraper fire again. Okay. One thing that Hoover did not want to do is he did not want to give what is called direct relief. He did not want to put relief or money into the hands of the people. He wanted to give it to banks, who would then give it to businesses, who would hire people and then pay people. But the thought of actually giving money directly to the people, he said, no, I don't want to do that. He felt like, once again, state governments, private charities, churches, they should provide the relief. But by 1932, states were running out of money and churches were running out of money. Anybody who had any money didn't have it anymore because they were trying to do that relief. Okay. So for the first time in U.S. history, the government finally says we are going to give direct relief to the people, which had never been done before. So the U.S. government provided $1.5 billion for public works projects, and of that money, $300 million went to direct relief. So they gave it to the states. The states then decided how they were going to divvy that money out to its citizens. So the state governors had to apply for the loans from the federal government to get the money for the direct relief, and then they could use that money the way that they saw fit, and so on. And so for the first time, the government is giving out basically welfare money in order to help people get back on their feet and survive. Okay? All right. Now, this leads us to the reading assignment. And so as far as the taking notes on the reading, don't worry about the notes on the reading. But you will have to turn in your notes over this lecture here. All right? So then at the bottom there, underneath the links for the videos, you're going to have a link to the reading and then another link to the questions. And so get them done. All right? It's going to talk about people and how they were mad and how they were getting on the government and how they wanted change. And for the first time, you have the people saying it's the government's responsibility to get us out of this mess. So, all right, good luck with that assignment.